Hello and welcome. I'm your host and speaker, Manideep Meda, and I am Associate MuleSoft Developer at Infometry. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. In today's webinar, I will be talking about database connector in MuleSoft. So feel free to drop questions on the topic or share your struggles and experiences during this live session. We will answer your queries through chat. So let's start the session. So this session is organized by Infometry. We are a pure play data analytics company based out of Fremont, California, with our offshore development center in Bangalore, India. We came into inception back in 2010, and since then, we have been offering domain-specific analytics solution for high-tech, energy, life sciences, retail, manufacturing, and finance customers. So, being a data analytics software services and solutions provider, we focus on delivering predictive and prescriptive analytics solutions, cloud data warehouse implementation, data governance, enterprise service bus, microservices-based integration solutions, big data, cloud DevOps, Salesforce CRM, and product engineering. Infometry has been an engineering and consulting services partner for companies like Informatica, Matillion, Snowflake, Tableau, Adaptive Insights, Looker, etc. In addition to the services, we have also developed more than 15 cloud connectors for IACS. One mentioned under the blue blocks are developed and owned by us, and the rest are all developed by us only for organizations like Informatica and SAP Calidus, etc. So we have developed state-of-the-art analytics solution, Infofiscus, which can be hooked to any on-prem or cloud CRM or ERP or planning apps. Infofiscus is 100% cloud-based, pre-built analytics software developed using open architecture. Infofiscus comes in three different flavors: finance, supply chain, sales, and marketing analytics. So that's our quick introduction. And now let's move to our today's agenda. In this session, we're going to talk about how to use the database connector in MuleSoft. So we will be discussing about how database configuration to be done in MuleSoft, single record operations, bulk record operations, other operations, and advanced concepts and pooling profile. So coming to database connector in MuleSoft. So database connector in MuleSoft establishes communication between your Mule application and a relational database. So database connector in MuleSoft can connect to almost any JDBC relational database and run the SQL operations. So database connector in MuleSoft has connection providers like Derby connection, MySQL, Oracle, SQL Server, and generic connection. So these connection providers automatically set the driver class name and create the JDBC URLs with given parameters for these databases and database components. So we'll be discussing in the next slide of this. So to add a database configuration, soon after we open a studio and soon after we create a application. So in the right side, Mule palette, you can on the right side of the screen, we can see a Mule palette. So under the Mule palette, you can see add modules. So after you click on the add modules, so you will be able to see all the modules which are present in the MuleSoft. So the left screenshot is referring to the same. So after you click on add modules, click click on the database, drag and drop the database to the left side. So soon after you drag and drop the database to the left side, it will ask the which version of Maven dependency needs to be imported. So always select the latest version, then click on OK. So it's done. So database module has been, we have added the database module successfully. So after adding the module, click on any operation that you want to do. So in the right side of the screenshot, you can see what are the connectors or operations that has been present under the database. So now we'll be discussing about how to add the database configuration. Since we added a database module, so now we need to add a database configuration. So in order to add the database configuration, you need to go to global elements. So you need to go to the global elements. So then you need to add this configuration under the global elements. So you click on create, then you'll search for database config, then you click on database config. Then so after you click on database config, at first we need to select the which connection we are about to connect. So in this session, I will be discussing about MySQL database connection. So I will be clicking the MySQL connection. So after you click on the MySQL connection, then we need to add the required libraries. So once you click on the configure, you can add the JDBC driver from our local file, or you can add a Maven dependency, or I mean, we'll get an option of add recommended libraries as well. So accordingly, we'll select it and we'll add the JDBC driver. So you can see I will be selecting the MySQL connector Java 8.0.24 is a library. Okay. So soon after you click on this, after successfully adding the JDBC driver, you need to add the host, port, username, password, and the database name. So after adding all these things, you need to click on the test connection and it should return successful. So then you are successfully connected to your database from your MuleSoft. So now we'll be discussing about the single record operations. As we discussed, insert, update, and delete comes under the single record operations, and we'll be discussing about these three connectors under the single record operations. First is insert. So in order to insert a record into a database, we'll be using the insert connector. So we'll drag and drop the insert connector from the Mule palette to the canvas. So soon after you add the insert connector, so you will be able to see the one which you are seeing on the right side of the screen. So that is display name, connector configuration, and the query text and the input parameters. So you can change the display name accordingly as a part of best practices. Then you need to add the database configuration. So since we already added the database configuration under the global elements, so after you click on the drop down, you will be able to see the database config, and accordingly you will just select the database config. Since it is MySQL, so my database config is MySQL. So now I want to insert a record to my employee table. So employee is a table which is present in my database, MySQL database. So I want to insert a record into my employee table. So in order to insert a record into your database to the employee table, so this will be the SQL query. So insert into employee, then the respective column names, then the values of. Then normally in the SQL, we will be just directly we'll be giving the values. So but from MuleSoft, we'll be using this dynamic values. So this column, if you observe, for every column like ID, mobile address, we will be using the colon. So this colon is nothing but it represents that values are dynamic, which are dependent on the payload. So these three, the one which are present with colon, ID, mobile address, right? So we'll be giving these values in under the input parameters. If you see under the input parameters, ID, it's vars.id. So ID is nothing but it's stored in some variable. So I'll call ID, variable name called ID, then I'll be using it. So then mobile and address I'm getting from the payload. So it's nothing but payload can be from anywhere. So it can be a post request, directly a post request, or it can be from some other, um, I mean, suppose if you are using a integration from one system to another system, suppose Salesforce or AWS from anywhere, if you are getting that payload from the some other external system, obviously it can be a payload to here as well. So payload can be anything. So that's what I was about to say. So accordingly, we'll map it. So for the single record operations, right? So input parameters will be always a single object. because we are inserting a single record. So input parameters will be always a single object. So here also input parameters are a single object with three key value pairs. That's it. So this is how we'll insert a record into the database. So yeah, that's it. Coming to the insert. So let's discuss about the update operation. So here update operation is for a single record. So it's the same. You will just drag and drop the update connector from Mule palette to the flow. Display name can be changed to any name as a part of best practices. Then you will be selecting the database config as a connector configuration. Then you will be writing the respective update query. So now I want to update a mobile number for the employee table with based on the ID. So this will be my query. Update table name set, since I want to change the mobile number. So I'll be using the mobile is equal to mobile, then where ID is equal to ID. As I discussed in insert operation, this colon and followed by the name. So this will be the dynamic values which will be passed from the input parameters. So here also we are doing the same. So ID is nothing but here also I'm using vs.id because my ID is present in variable name called ID. Then mobile number, mobile. So mobile I'm getting from the payload. It can be directly a post request in the form of payload, or it can be from any other external system. So it can be from anywhere. So accordingly, we need to map it here. Since as I discussed, it's a single record operation, always input parameters will be single object with a key value pair. So with this, we will be able to, you can update a mobile number for the employee table based on the ID. So that's the update operation. So that's how the update operation works. Then coming to the delete operation. So here also it's the same. You will be dragging and drop the delete connector from the Mule palette to the canvas. Display name can be changed accordingly as a part of best practices as we discussed. Then we will be selecting the connector configuration. Now you will be writing a delete query which deletes a respective record. So now I want to delete a record from the employee table based on the ID. So I will be using this query delete from employee where ID is equal to ID. So ID is the dynamic value which I will be passing through input parameters. So here I'm not writing any object because if it is a single value, then directly we can map it ID vas.id. If there are more than one value, then obviously we have to use an object with key value pairs. So with this, we'll be able to delete the record based on the ID in the employee table successfully. So these are the single record operations. Coming to the bulk operations. So bulk operations are nothing but bulk update, bulk insert, and bulk delete. So bulk operations allow you to run a single query using a set of parameter values. Operations are similar to the single counterparts, except that instead of receiving input parameters as key value pairs, the operations expect them as a list of key value pairs. So as I discussed in the insert, update, and delete, it's a single object with the key value pairs. Since it's a single record we are inserting and it's a single object. But now, since we are discussing about the bulk operations, now the input parameters expects a array of objects. So that it inserts a multiple records, or if it is bulk insert, it inserts multiple records. If it is bulk update, it can update multiple records. If it is bulk delete, it can delete the multiple records. So the name suggests bulk means more. So now we'll be discussing about the bulk update. So it's all the same. Just drag and drop the bulk update connector to the canvas on the flow. Then display name connector configuration is same. Then SQL query also will be same. Now the query is also same. If you observe update employee set, we are updating the mobile number where ID is equal to ID. Earlier, ID was we are passing ID and mobile as a single object. So we are about to update only a single record. Now we will be having ID and mobile as a key value pair in multiple objects. Earlier it was only a single object and it was about to update a single record. Now, now since we are using bulk update, the input parameters expects ID and mobile as an array of objects so that it will update the multiple records. So the only difference from the update and bulk update will be input parameters. If the input parameters are array of objects, then we should use bulk update. If it is normal update, it will accept only a single object. Similarly, the bulk insert. Here also the payload is will be giving the input parameters. So here also if you observe, it is same. We'll be inserting into employee table with the respective columns. Everything is same. The insert and bulk insert, the query, configuration, everything will be same. Only thing differs is that input parameters. So earlier insert was expecting only a single object, but bulk insert will be expecting an array of objects. So since it is expecting array of objects, each object will be considered as a single record. And input, suppose if your payload, so here the payload is input parameters, right? So if the payload is like array of 10 objects, so it will insert 10 records. Each object will be considered as a single record. So now 10 records. If the payload is array of 10 objects with the ID, mobile, and address as a key value pairs, then this query by using this operation bulk insert, the employee table will be inserted with 10 records. So that's how the bulk insert works. Similarly, the bulk delete, here also it's the same. Everything is same. If you observe delete and bulk delete in the terms of configuration, display name or query, everything is same. Only differs is the input parameters. So here the input parameters are nothing but it expects array of objects, each object containing an ID as a key and its respective value. Suppose if you want to delete 4 records, so the input parameters payload should contain array of 4 objects and each object should contain ID as a key and its respective value. So the value which you are about to delete it in the employee database or employee table. So that's how the bulk delete works. Coming to the other operations in database, so we'll be discussing about select operation, store procedure, on table row, execute DDL, and execute script. Coming to the select operation. Select operation is nothing but we will be writing a query and this query will be giving us a reports as an output. So you will just drag and drop the select query, select operation from the mule palette to the flow. Then you can change the display name accordingly. Then you need to give the connector configuration. Then you need to write the select query. So here I am writing a query as select mobile address. So I'm selecting 2 columns, mobile and the address from the employee table based on the ID. So suppose if ID is a unique value, obviously I'll get only one record as a output. So now using this select operation, using this select query, I will be getting output of the select operation will be array of single object. If ID is a unique value, if ID is duplicated value for 2 or 3 records in an employee table, then I will be getting the response as array of 2 or 3 objects accordingly with the number of records this query, I mean, this query retrieves. Suppose if ID is not present, if the respective ID is not present, still select operation will not give any error. It will just give an response as empty array because no records has been selected with the respective ID. So this is how the select operation in the MuleSoft works. Coming to the stored procedure. As we all know, stored procedure is a prepared SQL code that you can save so that code can be reused over and over again. So if you have a SQL query that you write over and over again, so we'll save it as a stored procedure and we'll just call it to execute it. So that's the purpose of stored procedure in SQL. So in MuleSoft, how we call the stored procedure is in the following way. So normal SQL query, like call the respective stored procedure name. Since this stored procedure has been developed to accept two input parameters, so accordingly, we'll write the query in the same way. Call stored procedure with the both input parameters, and these both input parameters will be dynamic from the input parameters of this section, which we are seeing right now. So, and one more thing, one more main thing here is, suppose the employee details is stored procedure, which is accepting two parameters, ID and mobile, right? And we should pass the parameters in the same way. I mean, we cannot pass the parameters as employee details at first as mobile and ID. So the sequence should be same. However, the stored procedure was developed accordingly. So here also from Mule also we need to pass the parameters in the same sequence way. It can be passed vice versa. And we can see something called input parameters and output parameters. Input parameters are nothing but a stored procedure does not only accept input parameters, so it also gives us an output as an output parameters. So in this scenario, you can pass both the combination of input and output parameters using the input parameters. Suppose here the input parameters are ID and mobile, and consider an output parameter as an address. Okay, so if if the stored procedure is executed in such a way that if address is a response of the stored procedure, so we can consider address as an output parameter. So in this scenario, you can pass three, combination of input and output parameters as a three values like ID, mobile, and address. So we need to pass the key value pair. Then output parameters. Output parameters nothing but, as I mentioned, suppose if address is the response of the stored procedure, it will be considered as an output parameter. So then you need to enter the key and its respect to data type. Suppose if you consider as an address as an output parameter and the data type is varchar or string, right? Accordingly, we need to give its respect to data type. So that's the purpose of output parameters and the input parameters in the stored procedure. So next we'll be discussing about the execute script. So execute script is another connector or operation which is present in MuleSoft. So you will just drag and drop the execute script then to the Mule flow. So then you will select the database configuration. Then accordingly, you will be passing an SQL query text. So the purpose of execute script is you can pass as number of scripts as you want. Suppose if you want to insert two records, we can insert bulk insert as well. Suppose if you want an use and insert and update or a set of scripts. If you want to execute a set of scripts, so then you can use the execute script, or you can give the path also. You can um, you can store all the SQL scripts in a file, and you can give the respective path also. So it will work in that manner also. So that's the purpose of the execute script in MuleSoft. So we have another connector called execute DDL. As we all know, DDL means data definition language, and using DDL means like we can create a table or drop a table, alter, truncate, rename. So all these comes under DDL, right? So accordingly, if you want to create a table in database using MuleSoft, you can use execute DDL connector. So then you'll be selecting the respective configuration of the database. Then you will be writing a query of creating a table. Here I have written creating a table of employee. So accordingly, using this query, using this connector from MuleSoft, you can directly create a table in the respective MySQL. Since I'm using MySQL connection, so in my database, it will create a table called employee. Accordingly, you can drop a table or you can alter a table. So whatever the things which that has to be executed using DDL, right? So all those operations can be done using execute DDL connector with MuleSoft. Coming to the on table row. So on table row is another connector. Okay. So this is the only connector which will be used in the source section of the flow. So till now, whatever the connectors we have discussed, all those connectors are will be present in the process section of the flow. As we all know, in MuleSoft, we will be having three sections of a flow. One is source section, and another is process section, and another will be error handling if it is a flow. So till now, what are the connectors we have used? All these connectors is part of a process. But this is the only connector. On table is the only connector which will be used in the source section of the flow. Source. Source means if you want to trigger the flow instead of HTTP listener or instead of a normal uh, um, scheduler. So on table tray is one of the connector that will be used in the source section in order to trigger the flow. Okay. So watermark column values taken from this column are used to filter the contents of the next one so that only rows with a greater watermark value are processed. So soon after you drag and drop the on table row to the source section of the flow, then obviously we will be selecting the database configuration. Then you need to give the table name. So the which table on which table you want to apply this watermark. I mean on table row operation watermark. So then you will be selecting the respective table name at first. Then you need to give the watermark column. So on which column you want to apply this on table row operation. Uh, so then ID column. As we discussed, watermark column value should be always increasing value. So greater watermark value are processed, right? So suppose here I have mentioned ID, right? TID, right? TID is a watermark column in which it should be an increment column. Uh, suppose if a row is having TID column as value as 1, then the next row, if a new row inserted, then this time the value of TID should be 2 or 3, or it should be increasing value. So if the value is increasing, then only it can identify as a watermark value and the flow will be triggered accordingly. So for this purpose, the watermark columns in a table, always it should be a number. Suppose if a watermark column is a string, so it cannot be considered as an increasing value, right? So for this purpose, watermark column should be always the number and the subsequent rows which we insert, right? So it should be always the number column. So if you consider this ID or TAD is an increment column, if you want to mention it as a watermark column, and there is something called ID column, right? So here ID column again we will be mentioning the same as watermark column. Whatever we mention in the watermark column, the same column will be mentioning in the ID column. So what it does is it will make sure that the same row is not processed twice by concurrent pools. It will make sure that suppose if a new record is inserted and the on table row will trigger this flow, and if you keep the same column under the ID column, it will make sure that the same row, I mean the flow will not trigger by using the same row. So in order to not to process the same twice by concurrent polls. So that's the purpose of the ID column. So okay, so now we are given the table name, then watermark column and the ID column. Okay, so then we are having something called scheduling frequency. Scheduling strategy can be a cron or the fixed frequency. So if you want to make it as a fixed frequency, then you'll be mentioning unit, I mean time unit, like 10 seconds or 20 seconds or 10 minutes. Accordingly, we'll select it. If it is a cron job, then we'll be using the cron expression accordingly, so that at the respective time, the flow will trigger. And one another note on table row is, so database or schema name is mandatory or compulsory for the on table row operation. While creating a database configuration, we will be giving the database name or the schema name in the configuration along with the host port, username and password. Okay. But specifically for the on table row, this schema name or the database name is mandatory. If you don't give it, um, then we'll encounter an error that no database or schema has been mentioned or something like this. So this kind of error will be errored out. So if you are using on table row, always keep in note that you should always give the database name or schema name in the configuration. So that's how the on table row works. Coming to the advanced concepts in database. So soon after you drag and drop any connector, like select operation or insert operation, anything, you, you'll be having a general section, advanced section. So error mapping, all these sections. So till now we have discussed about the general section. So now coming to the advanced section. So in this advanced section, at first you will be seeing an streaming strategy. So we are having three types of streaming strategy in Mule. One is repeatable file store iterable, non-repeatable iterable, and repeatable in-memory iterable. Okay. So now we'll be discussing about the streaming strategy in detail. Coming to the non-repeatable iterable. Okay. So non-repeatable iterable means it will read only once. Suppose if you are using non-repeatable iterable, it can read only once. The data can be read only once and it's memory efficient. Once you read it, you should get rid of it. Non-repeatable means once you consume the stream, it will not be available for the next processor. Suppose if you are using an select operation at first, and if you are using non-repeatable iterable, right? And select operation has given the response as array of two objects, okay? And soon after the select operation, if you are using some transform message, output application JSON and the payload. So this time, till this transform message, till the first transform message, the data will be available. After that, again, if you use another transform message or another logger with output application JSON as a payload, so this time you will not your payload will be no longer available because the first soon after the select operation, the first transform message has already consumed the stream, and this data is no more available to the next processor. So in this way, the non-repeatable iterable works. So when you want to use the data only once and not the multiple times in the flow, so then you can go with the non-repeatable iterable. Next is repeatable in-memory iterable. As name suggests that you can read it more than once and it is stored in heap space. That means in the memory of the application. Use repeatable in-memory iterable when your file size is less and it can accommodate easily. Suppose if you are using repeatable in-memory iterable, as the name suggests, this response or this memory is available repeatedly throughout the flow. But the only disadvantage of repeatable in-memory iterable is if you click on repeatable in-memory iterable, you need to select the initial buffer size, then buffer size increment, then max in memory. Okay. Suppose if you are given the max in memory as some 1024 KB, okay, and if the response from the select operation is more than 1024 KB, right? In this scenario, you'll encounter an null pointer exception because you have given the max memory size to use as 1024 KB, but the response from the select operation is more than this size. So because of this, it will be unable to handle it and it will result in the null pointer exception. So that's why it is always recommended to use the repeatable in-memory iterable when your file size is less. And if you are more confident about your file size, only in this scenario, we should use the repeatable in-memory iterable. So next is repeatable file store iterable. So this will be the default. So by default in the Mule, this will be selected repeatable file store iterable. So when we want to process the large sets of data, So this will be the ideal streaming strategy. So it is same as repeatable in memory only. But here, although we will be giving the in-memory objects as some size or 500, right? Suppose in this screenshot you can see the in-memory objects as 500, and you are using repeatable files or iterable. So if your size is more than 500 also, suppose, although you have given it as max, I mean in-memory objects as 500, and if the size is more than 500 also, so how this streaming strategy works is, at first this 500 will be stored in a temporary file, in a temporary file. Then the next, after the 500, the next object will be stored here in this streaming strategy. So in this way, I mean, our data will be no more lost, and it will be always available throughout the flow, and it will be repeatedly available for us, for all the processors. So for this purpose, this strategy is selected as a default strategy in Mule. Why this is selected as a default strategy means because Mule does not know like how much data we are using. So by default, it will be files or iterable. Suppose if default is non-repeatable, then one stream is consumed and it cannot be get back, right? Or it cannot be consumed again. So it's better not to have a non-repeatable as a default. So for this purpose, Mule has given the repeatable files or iterable as a default streaming strategy. And if default is repeatable in memory, right? In this scenario also, if file size is too large and it cannot store more data, so this will result in the null pointer exception. So that's how the streaming strategies works. Coming to the query section. So in the query section, you can see the query timeout, right? Query timeout and the query timeout unit. So if you want to use a query timeout, by default it will be 0, so that no timeout will be used. If you keep it as 0, suppose if you want to give it a some time, right? 5 seconds or 10 seconds accordingly with the respect to unit, 1 minute or 2 minutes. So how it works is it indicates the minimum amount of time before the JDBC driver attempts to cancel the running statement. Suppose you have written a select query and you have mentioned the query timeout as 10 seconds, and the select query which you have given is taking more than 10 seconds. So in this scenario, it will cancel this running statement because we have mentioned the timeout as 10 seconds and the query is taking more than 10 seconds. So in this scenario, it will cancel the running statement. So that's how the query timeout works. Next is fetch size. Fetch size is nothing but indicates how many rows to fetch from the database when rows are read from result set. Suppose if you have mentioned the fetch size as 10 rows and your select statement has given the response as 15 rows, right? So how the fetch size works is it will see since you have mentioned the number as 10. So soon after the 11th row is written, it will stop that execution and it will give the response as 10 only because we have mentioned the fetch size as 10 rows. Soon after the count reaches the 10, it will not care about the rest of the rows. So that's how if you have kept the fetch size as 10 rows, so only the respective 10 rows will be returned as an output. Next is max rows. Almost it works same as a fetch size, but the only difference between max rows and the fetch size is if you mention the 10 as fetch size, the mule will see only till 10. I mean, soon after the number 10 is reached, the size, it will just cancel the statement and it will give the 10 rows as an output. But how max rows works is, suppose if a select statement has written some 15 or 20 rows as an output, it will read all 15 or 20 rows. Out of this 15 or 20 rows, it will take the first 10 rows as a response and it will give us response. So that's how the max rows works. So in the case of max rows, the rest of the records will be silently dropped. But in the case of fetch size, it will not even read the rest of the records. Since the number has 10, once the number 10 is reached, the count is reached, it will just give that as a response. So that's how the fetch size and the max row works. Next, coming to the output section. So here you have mentioned the target variable and the target value. Suppose if you want to store the response of this connector in a variable, then you can initialize a variable name here. So accordingly, the response will be stored in the respective variable instead of in the payload. That's how the target variable works. Next is the reconnection strategy. So we'll be having two types of reconnection strategy. One is reconnection forever, and another is the reconnection number of attempts with number of attempts. If you keep it as forever, it will keep on trying to reconnect to the database if there is any connectivity issue. If you keep uh, the reconnection strategy as for limited, right? You can mention like 2 or 3 times or 5 times, and you need to mention the frequency also. Suppose if you have kept the number as 5 times, right? Reconnection, and you should mention the frequency as 1 second or 2 seconds or 10 seconds accordingly. So for each frequency, it will try to reconnect, and accordingly, that's how the reconnection works here. So next is the pooling profile. So pooling profile in the database. So this pooling profile will be under the configuration section. It will not. It's not about the uh, connector configuration. It's about the database configuration. So at first, while giving the database configuration under the global elements, right? So at the same time, you can mention this pooling profile. Okay. So pooling profile enables to build a connection pool. Connection pool establishes connections to the database. So DB connector operations uses the connection from the connection pool without having to establish the connections every time. So this improves the performance. That's how the pooling profile works. Suppose max pool size, right? So after you click on the pooling profile, you will click on the edit inline. Then you need to provide all these values. So max pool size, coming to the max pool size. So you should always a number value. So what it does is maximum number of connections a pool maintains at any given time. Suppose if you have mentioned here it is 5, right? So at any given time, 5 connections should be available. Maximum number of 5 connections a pool maintains at any given time. So that's the purpose of the max pool size. Minimum pool size. The minimum number of connections a pool maintains at any given time. So act per increment, it also should be a number value, determines how many connections at a time to try to acquire when the pool is exhausted. Suppose if you have given the max pool size as 5 and all 5 has being used, and at this time, so we can acquire the increment also. We can ask for the more connections. So at this time, you can mention the number accordingly when the pool is exhausted. Determines how many connections at a time to try to acquire when the pool is exhausted. So if the pool is not exhausted, then it will not go for, this acquire increment is not needed. So this acquire increment comes into picture when the pool size is exhausted. Next is prepared statement cache size. Determines how many statements are cached for pool connection. Setting this to 0 disables the statement caching. So, it determines how many statements are cached per pooled connection. So based on each pool connection, it will see how many statements has been cached. So that's how the prepared statement cache size works. So next is max weight. Max weight is nothing but it also accepts a number value. Then the amount of time a client trying to obtain a connection waits for it to be acquired when the pool is exhausted. Setting this to value 0 means wait indefinitely. So this is equivalent to checkout timeout and cannot be overridden in the additional properties. So Then max wait unit, you should mention the unit size of this max wait, how much time we can wait for a connection to be acquired when the pool is exhausted. So that's the max wait. Then next is max wait unit, it can milliseconds, microseconds, minutes, hours, etc. Next is maximum idle time. Determines so maximum idle time. So maximum idle time determines how many seconds a connection can remain pooled but unused before being discarded. So how many seconds this connection should be remained as pooled but it has been unused before being discarded. So that's the purpose of the maximum idle time. So it can, I mean, how much time it should be idle for the pooled connection before being discarding. So that's the purpose of the maximum idle time, and you should mention them in seconds as a unit. So setting this to as so setting this value to 0 means idle connections never expire. So always it's better to keep the idle time as 0 so that if there are any unused connections also, it will never be expired and it will be used accordingly by the respective connectors in the flow. So that's the purpose of the maximum idle time. So I think that's it. So this is all about database connector in MuleSoft. I hope you understand well. So we reach the end of the presentation and it's the question and answers time. Please feel free to post your questions so that I will be able to answer. Yes, hi Kavi.
Yeah. So in order to coming to this streaming concept, right?
Yes.
So what's the difference between like a repeatable file store and memory in that one sections?
Okay, fine. So, I mean, almost both will be same. I mean, in both scenarios, the memory will be available throughout the end of the flow. The only difference comes here is the size of the object. Okay? Suppose if you use repeatable in-memory iterable, right?
Mm-hmm.
So suppose if you have mentioned some initial buffer size and the max buffer size, right? So accordingly, if the respective object size is reached, right?
Okay.
Uh, so then we'll get an exception of, I mean, null pointer exception because the size we have mentioned and the response we got is it's more than the size we have given. So because of that, we'll encounter an error regarding this. So if you are sure about the size of the objects we receive from, I mean, from our query, right, from our insert or select query accordingly, so then we should go for the repeatable in-memory address. Repeatable file store iterable is suppose if you have mentioned the object size as 500 or 600 accordingly, right? Even though if the response is more than the respective size, still it will accept without giving the error, and the previous files will be stored in temporary file, and the new files, I mean the new objects also will be stored in the in this streaming strategy. So accordingly, this memory will be available throughout the flow. So that's why Mule has given the by default streaming strategy as file store iterable because we will not be sure about the response we are getting, right? So I mean that's how the difference
Okay.
comes.
Okay. So in the advanced sections, like I think we discussed about that max rows and fetch size. I think
Correct.
both the operations are similar, or is there is any difference?
Yeah. So I mean it's almost similar, but only thing differs is in fetch size, right? Suppose if you have given the number as 5 or 10 in the fetch size, so how
Mm-hmm.
Mule works is soon after Mule gets the respective size, I mean it will not run the I mean it will not wait for the query to complete because the respective fetch size which it is expecting it has got and it will just give a response. But the
Okay.
max rows is, I mean, the mule will wait till the query executes, right? Suppose if query was giving 20 rows or 30 rows, it still waits for the entire response. And after getting the entire response, it will take the first 10 rows as an output. So in terms of the time, right? So I think, I mean, that's where it differs, the fetch size and the max rows.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Mani. I'm good.
Yeah, thanks. Man.
Hi, Manideep.
Yeah, hi, Cindy.
Manideep, in pooling profile configuration, there are two options called prepare statement, cache size, and max statements. So, may I know what are the difference between them?
So prepare statement, I mean cache sizes, it will be storing the statements which we are prepared. Okay, so that means if you have given the connection pools as 5 or minimum, I mean based on the connection pools, right, and the accurate implement, accordingly the statements which it has executed till now, I mean the respective memory will be cached. I mean that's how the prepared statement cache size will work. I think max statements, it is not plays a major role as per my observation. So I did not explain more about the max statements. But prepare statements means that means it's only for I mean to store the memory as cache. I mean to give the response immediately. So for that purpose we'll be using.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Manideep. Am I audible?
Yes, yes. Hi.
Yeah. So Dheeraj, my question is, what is the exact, difference between bulk and normal operations or connectors, like in terms of input parameters?
So the only difference comes here is normal operations like normal insert, update, or delete operations. It expects the single object as I mean as an input parameter because we are using the single operation, single record operations. So that's why it expects the single object as an input parameter. So, but bulk operations expects the input parameters as an array of objects because it is expecting some bulk amount of data. So that's why it will be expecting the array of objects. So the only difference is in input parameters will be single object in normal operations and it will be array of objects in the bulk operations. So that's how the difference comes here.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. Any more questions? Anyone would like to ask? So, no questions? Thank you so much, Manideep, for this
Yeah,
amazing
thank you,
presentation.
Dheeraj.
Yeah, we
Thank
have
you.
got one query in the chat from Mohammed Hakim. We will be sharing this video recording, this webinar recording on your mail ID. Yeah. Yeah. So, thanks for joining the webinar today. We appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to join us. Yeah. We hope you found it informative. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you.